from the Crypt.
This episode of Tales from the Crypt is brought to you by CoinTaxes. CoinTaxes prepares your crypto taxes in 10 minutes or less by seamlessly integrating all of your wallets, exchanges, and other information together to make your tax experience as simple as possible. The best part about it, you get 10% off CoinTaxes and help support this show when you sign up at cointaxes.com/crypt. That's cointaxes.com/crypt. Once again, get CoinTaxes for only $45 when you sign up today at cointaxes.com/crypt. That's CRYPT. Support your boy Marty. He's got a wife to feed.
I'm essentially making arguments against myself in a lot of ways, but you could be smart and not have wisdom, and it's making decisions for governance takes wisdom, and so it's we had the founding fathers of the U.S., which I hate going into this type of analogy, but it's what made it work was wisdom. George Washington and Benjamin Franklin realizing that they needed to step back, right? And they're
Satoshi realizing he needs to step back.
That's why I'm saying it. It's I think he did it for more than that reason, but I think that was definitely part of it. But yeah, if you want something to be decentralized, if that's actual the priority, if you want this ecosystem, you have to bite your tongue. And I'm not that's not a direct comment to him, but it's just a broader comment of how do you achieve that? It's you can't have people who have undue influence. And it's a central point of failure that a lot of people, when people always produce these models of what protocol is most decentralized, they're always leaving that part out. It's how are there several people who are the main part of this? Mm-hmm. It's that's always left out.
Yeah, the founder centralization is, and again, going back to the multiple aspects of this space, technical, economic, and then psychological, which probably encapsulates everything to an extent. It's probably a part of everything to an extent, but again...
Say that again? I missed that.
So, putting together the technical, the economics, and then the psychological is more than anything I'm beginning to believe is that this is a psychological phenomenon.
Yeah, no, it's this is the area that I've been obsessed with, so behavioral finance, right? Mm-hmm. And so I went through a heavy poker phase where it's it which is kind of encapsulates that of you need to understand the math of it, but human psychology is even more important. And I think the misconception about poker is you're trying to read people. It's no, you're taking just samples of human behavior over these situations, and you could extrapolate from that. Virtually no good poker player tries reading people at the table. They go off of instincts, but it's more of their mental model of human psychology and that more than anything. But yeah, it's there's so many complicated parts of making all this work that one or two people as being a core part of it, in my mind, is a massive point of failure and a prohibitor to it becoming successful.
I agree.
I think there are other reasons why I don't think Ethereum is a great store of value outside of that, but that's maybe point number 9 on my list.
Let's get into that. You said that you were initially excited by Ethereum. Brendan got you excited in the idea, but have since...
I think this is an unpopular, or this is an opinion I haven't heard other people say, but I think it's true. I think a lot of now this recent Bitcoin success has been because of Ethereum. I think a lot of Ethereum has brought a lot of attention into the space and has been a slow trickle of people into Bitcoin. So in a lot of ways, Bitcoiners have Ethereum to thank for that. So Ethereum...
I would
agree.
I think
I really like Ethereum. I like the Ethereum community. What I don't like is the current market perception of what it is, and I think it's very irrational. What Ethereum people are trying to do is fantastic, and you should be doing that, and they're super ambitious and overall very good, nice people. What I don't like is market irrationality, and then they're making bad arguments, and so you hear Bitcoin Cash people doing this as well. We're really the only times I'm ever even I'm not vocal at all, but whenever I'll engage and somebody be in almost like Ashley-ish tone, be like, your argument construction is terrible. Like if you're leaning on ad hominem or like emotional arguments, then it's like you kind of can't engage with that, and so like you're like bad. You're just like a bad. You're bad for everything. You're bad for this community, and so I think Ethereum has leaned on this like a appeal to emotion and like proof of stake for like electricity. And I think Bitcoin Cash is leaning now on this like emotional appeal of like it's for everybody and cheap and whatever. And there's a really good quote. I'm gonna mess up who it was, but like I've used this a lot lately. It's like tyranny is the deliberate removal of nuance, and like I think a lot of that's happening. Like it's like you're a bad person if you're not recognizing this is an extremely complicated thing, and like that's kind of like honestly like that's kind of like will like get me to be more vocal. And so that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, and that's it's weird to see. It's like the world we're living in where it's a lot of virtue signaling. I think the word you were looking for in that explanation was virtue signaling. I don't know if you want to say it.
I tend to avoid to try. I think I try to avoid overly used phrases because like it starts building like connotation. Like virtue signal is now built a certain. It's just me being weird, but like virtue signal has built like a certain connotation of what it is. So like when you say it, people will shut down and be like, if you're virtue signaling to somebody, they'll just shut down and be like, oh, like you're using like a out of the pocket thing to like that's not like a vanilla like comeback. So like it's like I just try and avoid that.
Probably smart. I should probably try to avoid that too. I actually don't say that too often, but I couldn't think.
The virtue signaling is a perfect way of putting it. Yeah. It's just there's just too much connotation attributed to that.
Yeah, and the nuances, and that's what baffles my mind about the space right now is it's so nuanced, and to sort of try and like put things in these very concise boxes, like this is the way it needs to be, this is the way it needs to be, like it just doesn't make any sense to me. And there's especially
if you can't like take the other side of the argument and almost make it better, then like you don't have a right to like to debate the topic.
Well, this is
it's like the straw man. Like straw man's also
exactly.
Abused.
So
it's just there's just so much of that happening right now, and like I've honestly just wanted to stay out of it, but I think it's almost becoming detrimental to like all of like the whole ecosystem and like the future of it. I kind of believe in this like factor of like Murphy's law, where like anything that can happen, it can go wrong, will happen. So like weak things will eventually shake out. I'm just a little concerned that rationality can have like residual spillover that'll just negatively affect everything. And so I don't know. I go back and forth in my head of like I'm never going to become a Medium posting person for a lot of reasons, but it's like how public do you want to be, right? And like most people that obviously respect are public, but it's like how do you remain in like a good spot? So I don't know. That's a tangent.
No, and I think that's something that you should think hard and long about, because once you throw yourself into the ether, no pun intended, it's hard to get out of it, and you don't want to get dragged. And so my value to this space is a shit poster. I'll say it. I'm a shit poster. And that's my value to the space.
I think it's artistic thing, and I appreciate it. And I like to say I'm like a 5 out of 10, and getting getting better. But it's an artistic endeavor.
I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I would. It's fun. But going back to arguments that some of these projects lean on that aren't nuanced at all, my favorite is proof of work is an energy waste. We need to go to proof of stake to save the world. And
this is like a 6-hour
I know,
conversation.
But that's the So I'm not going to name names, but there's some crypto VC funds out there that have been saying we're only going to invest in proof of stake protocols and proof of stake projects and projects working on top of proof of stake networks because we want to save the world. And it's like, that's the least nuanced bullshit argument I've ever heard in my life, because if you actually dive into the electricity consumption case study of proof of work blockchains versus proof of stake, there's a good argument to be made that proof of work could actually be a positive incentive to find cleaner energy and more efficient energy.
Like, what's ultimately gonna happen? Like, there are about like a bajillion different tangents we can take off this. Like,
take us down the tangent you want to.
What was I gonna say?
And get your face closer to the mic, please.
Is this good?
Yes.
Eat the mic. Oh man. What was I gonna say?
And you need to catch up with me on the wine. I feel like a degen right now.
No, like, what was I about to say?
We're getting into proof of work versus proof of stake electricity tangents. One that you want to go down, because we could spend 6 hours on this.
To start, like, something that I haven't disclaimed is that, like, I believe in a lot of these projects. I think just the perception of value is wrong. So, like, I think, like, this multi-token world, like, makes sense in a lot of ways. I think we're many years away from that. I don't think anything competes with Bitcoin on being a store of value, though. And so, like, if that's what a maximalist is, then I guess I'm that. I think that we would have a very complicated, like, digital asset space, though. I'm not labeled that. I think we are just a ways away from, like, this world working, and I think Bitcoin scaling in value and increasing scope is a really important part for everything's health. So, like, people who are saying, like, or like have a scarcity approach to, like, this needs to fail so this project succeeds, I think is just extremely misguided, and it's bad for everybody. So, like, that's something I never understand. But, like, I do, like, there are a lot of things that'll make sense out of this. It's like what's kind of needed now for overall ecosystem health and for the world, or if you want to get all whatever. Like, we need, like, Bitcoin is extremely important to that, and to make, like, weird arguments about this does this better, whatever. It doesn't compete on the store of value front.
Thank you. Like, this is what I've been trying to get at, is we need to establish the first use case and get it down pat before we move on to other things. Like, I've been writing about this a lot, and again, it's a heuristic. Like, if we're gonna make all of this work, this new technology, we have to make sure the first application works. Not perfectly, but works and is usable in a way that it's marketed as.
So, like,
I don't focus on the token stuff at all, because I'm like, we need to figure out the money aspect of this first, which is the first application.
Yeah,
and then we move from there.
It hasn't, like, quote unquote succeed yet. So
exactly,
and people just in life in general just take a scarcity approach of, like, I need to rip this down to be. It's like, just leave it. like it's bad for everybody. Like, and this is a massive problem in the space right now. But, like, I think Ethereum is, like, really like, I think there are, like, a handful of really cool smart contract platforms. Like, how that works in terms of value is unclear yet. So, like, Dfinity is, like, the new one is super cool. Is, like, how do people interact with the value, though? It's like, could you just, if you can, like, hold Bitcoin, transfer into it, or whether it's through, like, an exchange, decentralized exchange, atomic swap, whatever. Like, why would you settle? Like, why do you need to hold any of these things? It's like, if you're in the business of executing smart contracts, or, like, in this dApp ecosystem, you kind of have to hold a certain percentage. Again, that's, like, working cap. So that's not something, like, what I guess what's even better is, like what's useful for listeners is to go into, like, what is store of value, because I think that's probably lost on people. And so, store of value is just, like, what you are comfortable putting and just leaving away, and that's, like, when you accrue more value than you are using day-to-day basis, like, that's, like, your bank account. And so, like, that's your savings account, really. That's put away for I'm not touching this, right? So you have your checkings and savings account. Checkings account is more like your working capital, where that's something that you hit every now and then. Savings account is an example of a store of value. The best store of value that's ever existed is real estate, though. So, like, in this realm, real estate, savings accounts, so that's, like, currency. That's, you're being confident that that country that runs the currency isn't going to implode or do something really weird. They have, like, blue chip stocks, like, things that aren't going to change a lot, and it's like a longer term horizon of being comfortable with it. And so, like, I think that concept is lost on a lot of people.
And let's get heady here. Do you think that's because of, like, the society we grew up in? I would say this is, like, Western society the last 40 to 50 years with fiat currency and this push for conspicuous consumption. And let's get to like the psychology of like people don't like when I say this, but we live in a fucked up society that's driven by
well, I think there's a happy medium. You don't want to be saving and then saving and if the world is perpetually saving, that's not a good thing.
No,
if
you
the
don't
world
be
is
hoarding forever.
Yeah, it's like everybody's like, oh, I'll save for my kids. If you take that model out to the nth degree, it's like, well, then what happened? It's like it's not an effective way. This is why economies, like central banks, like a certain amount of inflation. It's like you don't want everybody to be saving everything because that's just not good for an economy. At the same time, it is good for the high velocity. Like this is the argument for like a basic fundamental income, like putting hands into like lower income classes is high velocity. Like they'll take it and spend it. Like that is like a very good near term way to boost an economy. But if everybody's spending, that kind of collapses in on itself. And so like there is a happy medium. I don't think people much smarter than me like probably have a better clue of what that is. But yeah, like we have a weird, I think, getting ahead of your little, like we have a weird dichotomy of like the baby boomer generation above is obsessed with saving and our generation is not at all. And so I don't know I don't know the full implications of what's going to happen with that, but that's a really weird, interesting thing that's happening.
Yeah, and so the point I'm trying to make here is like, is that a product of the monetary policy? So Saifuddin Ammous is coming out with the Bitcoin standard. If you got your hands on a copy of that before it went live this month, or became open to the public this month, he really, in one part of the book, he touches on like how easy monetary policy has led to macro decisions that have trickled down to the microeconomies that have lasting effects. So one example being the production of corn subsidies, leading to the production of high fructose corn syrup, leading to shittier food, leading to higher heart disease, leading to higher deaths. You can even get into this stuff like leading to opioid addiction and shit like that. And it's like a vapid.
I think it's a variable. I don't like I was saying before. It's like I think everything's more complicated than what everybody thinks.
Yeah.
I think what may even be more part of it is just like we're like there's the common saying, like the first generation grows it, the first generation starts it, the second generation grows it, the third generation blows it. And we kind of have like a third generation effect. We're kind of there's a lot of things happening at the same time. There's kind of that-ish. Like the great generation of the United States was like our grandparents, where like they came out of World War I, World War II more likely. They produced the baby boomers who like grew this fantastic economy, and we're kind of now with what's left. Like, and like, what do we do from here? Like, everybody has like this generations ahead of us that has done like really like, fantastic things, and like the lost generation is like overused as a thing, but it's like we definitely are. Like nobody has any like, and this is now getting more broader abstract, but it's like this is like that's why there's just so many weird causes that people care so much about, because like there's not a central motivation for anybody to do anything right now. Like everything's pretty good, and so like getting back into abstracting myself from this, it's like this is part of like my overall like Bitcoin thesis and why I got interested 2012 2014. Like in college at that time was a pretty good like foreshadow of was like what was going to come. And so like Duke from that time period like changed a lot, and like the like what's happening overall, and like
is this post lacrosse scandal?
This is years after, like Duke is like year after, like every year there's a scandal, but like from when I came in as a freshman to when I left, it was like a completely dramatic like cultural shift of like, I mean like some of it very, very good, some of it really weird. And so you could kind of see like this is kind of goes with like Ray Dalio's theory of like we're into this like long-term debt cycle a good like a symptom and a flag of that is just societal like unrest, and so it's like that's kind of what's happening now. So there's just so many things happening, but like we're kind of like hitting them all at the same time, and like all of them probably have a part of this, but it was like it's kind of tying back into the original story. It's like you kind of see this if you're in college from like 2010 to 2000. So I was in college from 2011 2015. It was like that's really when most like colleges started going through this weird shifty shape, like weird shift.
No, I was
like some of it obviously very good, and just some of it not.
No, I was at college at the same time, and things definitely got weird. I mean, I came from a Jesuit high school where they were like question everything.
Yeah.
And then I went on to college to study economics. And luckily, I went to school in Chicago, was able to work and like talk with people that are actually like in the industry about the topics I was studying in economics. And I found like they were really, really, really trying to indoctrinate us with like Keynesianism mindset, like basing everything off of inflation, really focusing on stuff like the Laffer curve and stuff like that. And there really wasn't any controversial thought within the economics program that I went through. I don't know, it may be different for you, but I know
I mine was more behavioral finance folks. Well, I ended up picking classes that went there, but and how does this all tie to like Bitcoin crypto right now? Yeah, it's I think more so than anything, it's the VC culture that is like a large part of like this new wave. So it's like new, really dumb retail money who's just kind of like momentum trading, like good to latch on anything that happens in any market. But I think this like theory of like any thing that's interesting has value, and like it's just like the Keynesian beauty contest. Like the Titan's like it's not doing anything now, but let's just throw all these features into it, and it'll just attract a lot of like attention. So. Like that's really that kind of that works in really early stages of investing, but doesn't like after a certain point because you're taking like really
the sunk cost is getting bigger and bigger and bigger after a certain point.
It's just there needs to be a model towards like actual reality. Mm-hmm. And so what happens with these types of tokens or anything that says we're going to do all of these things, and so that's a really good way of attracting investors. They'll just naturally realize that they can't do some of them. And so as soon as they can't do one of them and they announce that, you're isolating a group of investors that came in for that reason. And so it's just a natural like leakage of people who find this valuable. So also like all of these assets who are trying to do all these things, they won't at least be able to do some of them. Let's be real, like won't be able to do most of them. And so it's just like a perfect recipe for like this natural like sell-off / disaster.
And is that why you think Ethereum's good for Bitcoin? Because you think a lot of people that were called to Ethereum because it's going to be the world's computer are sort of realizing the inherent limits that ecosystem has and falling back onto the a priori, like let's figure out money first and then move from there type mentality that Bitcoin has.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see that happening in real time. Like I've seen a handful of developers who started with Ethereum and are now a lot more interested in Bitcoin. And that's like not a process that happens vocally. Like in like the Bitcoin community is like generally pretty private, and it's like I'm not gonna write a Medium post about this.
Yeah.
So like that's happening in real time now, and like you're seeing like a wave of Bitcoin developers and like getting obsessed about it, and like they all have stories of like I started in this area, and it's like now I kind of just see this, and so like that's not going to be reported anywhere, but that's definitely happening. And so like so to answer that, yes, definitely.
It's going to be reported on Tales from the Crypt. You heard it here first.
Yeah, no, and like they're now like growing infrastructure pieces of like getting these things funded now, and so they're a lot more. Like you have the original like OGs, I hate the word, that are helping fund a lot of things, and then like the smart money who's still yet to come in is kind of realizing this as well. And like I've talked to several people who are interested in just like how can they help with the Bitcoin community. So like whereas they're involved individually, they're not as like their fund or family office or whatever yet. Like that's been actually the most surprising thing to me in the last few months is like smart money is actually smart.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's like they're like I don't know if like Peter Thiel and Jack Dorsey. Like they've said this, and it's like that. I mean, maybe it was part of that like leaked into that arena, but a lot of people will say, yeah, I think Bitcoin's interesting. I'm not sure about everything else now. That's kind of the general tone of like the quote unquote smart money.
Smart money, yeah. Thiel said, I'm not interested in any other blockchain.
It's just like they're like, and if they are interested, they very well know that what they're doing is gambling.
Yeah.
So like they know that they wouldn't, if they're doing it individually, they'd be like, like whatever. But as like a fund with like real fiduciary duty, and you have to think things like, and like there are a lot of conversations happening with like just Bitcoin core engineers to these guys, to like the Bitcoin, just people within Bitcoin that are happening that isn't like public posted about, that's happening right now.
Yeah, and that's the way it should be. Shout out Jack, shout out Peter Thiel. Hopefully Miles Suter from Cash App. I made a wrong reference on the last podcast. It's not Square Cash, it's Cash App. Hopefully Miles at Wahoo on Twitter. WAHWHOWAH. Hopefully he can get Jack in the studio at some point in May.
Really?
Fingers crossed. I'm not going to hold my breath.
Pressure's
on Miles.
I bet he'd like to.
I doubt Jack comes in here, but if you want to, Jack, hey, Barstool's a big fan of Twitter.
Freaks.
We can talk to freaks. I know you like mezcal. I'll have the finest mezcal that New York City has to offer.
Are you almost done with yours? I gotta catch up there.
You do have to catch up. Sorry for that little tangent there. But, so let's bring this back to, like you were just describing, like smart money's smart, and finding the actual value in these things, it takes time, and that's the beauty.
What I also didn't talk about was store of value, which is what I think of like recent conversations I've had, and like analogies that I like to use about like store of value, is that a store of value should be easy to understand. And so like what I've said is like there needs to be like really easy social consensus of like what it is. So like Bitcoin's only trying to do one thing right now.
Exactly.
And so going back into like Keynesian beauty contest, whatever, but like the properties of a good store of value have like social consensus of what it is, and aren't like all those like real estate, blue chip stocks, like all that. Like you have confidence that what you're buying isn't going to completely change tomorrow, and like you don't really have that with anything else. Like you can think like, and like you may be right that the technology is more interesting and superior, but in terms of like what is value,
it's about
like
certainty.
Yeah.
Like that's what markets revolve around, is certainty and uncertainty. And if you have that certainty that the protocol is not going to change and not going to try and do a million things that increase its attack surface, then you have a sounder investment thesis. So I just had this revelation in the last 35 seconds.
35?
Not 35.
32.
All right, now it's at 15 seconds. But it's about certainty and uncertainty. That's what markets, that's how like arbitrage works in markets, is playing playing the R between certainty and uncertainty.
If we're going to be honest, like Bitcoin is the only thing that's doing what it's like. Everything could shut down today, and like you just run software. It's doing what it's supposed to be doing right now, right? And so there are like a lot of other cool things that could be happening, but what it is already is completely useful. So like I mean that's like, it's like the personality of the marketplace like being inherently speculators. So like let's call one bucket, I would say VCs and speculators are the same thing right now, but speculators who are just like riding waves, and then VCs. Like the VC is perpetually interested in the next new thing. So Bitcoin's way old news. Ethereum's almost old news at this point.
I want to drop a name right now, but I really don't want to.
What?
I won't. I'm not going to do it. Bitcoin's boring. Bitcoin Core's vision is boring.
Yeah, I mean I hear that all the time. It's like that that probably doesn't have an economics background,
right?
What's funny is that, and like I'm not trying to. And this is obviously sound like but it's like it's funny just how this worked out is that like people who would say like Bitcoin's like probably going to be the only like substantial store of value either have like deep engineering backgrounds, or like have like economics finance backgrounds, and so where you have people in the middle. Not the middle. People who fall into everything else are like entrepreneur type people. Like it's a different personality, and so it's like if you start deconstructing that, it makes a whole lot of sense.
It does.
And so like why I would say like Bitcoin looks pretty fantastic now is because this next wave of like capital to come in, institutional money, are all like economic type finance people, and this was saying is like that the reason why they could see that clear is because they have that framework, and so it's all about having the correct framework of like how does this all work, and so like me as like investor trader or whatever, like I'll hold things with different like time horizons. I'll think about holding for things different time horizons, but like ultimately you need the correct framework of like what is like real in order to do that correctly. Because if you have a bad framework and you take a short-term position, like that's when you get destroyed, because that's like if your model is wrong, then a variable that you hadn't accounted for is going to impact you in a way that you just could never foreseen. And like that'll destroy you.
Yeah, you need that a priori framework and those a priori principles from which to move from. And I would argue that a lot of the spray and pray type investors in this space don't have that. Their a priori is the way you make money is you allocate risk, you disperse risk across the
I mean, it's worked for like last 15 years.
It has worked, but it's not going to work forever. Especially not, and that's why like it can work forever in certain areas and certain arenas, but not in this arena, I don't think. And especially we're trying to change money, and again, I harp on this for a lot on this podcast, but
I would say that even investing in fintech companies takes a specific expertise.
Yeah.
For like a VC, and so like they're a great like. They're just like, and again, I'm not saying this about, I think they're like the top 5% of VCs are like killers and super smart, but just like vanilla VC is just like completely tracking what everything else is. And so it's all like, I got into this deal because this person's in this deal, so I want to get in this deal.
Yes. I saw a tweet about that today as well. I think you may have seen it too. But it's going to be fascinating to watch this play out. So let's talk timeline here. You're talking about time horizons. How long do you think it takes for the masses at large to sort of come to grips with Bitcoin and come to grips with what money is in general? So that's one thing I've been finding as I've been trying to educate people about the space, is that people don't understand money at its core, let alone Bitcoin, and how that changes money and the money that we interact with today on a daily basis. So I think I've been saying it's going to take a generation or two to completely sort of wipe the slate clean of what money is, because I would say we've been engineered to believe it is something that it shouldn't be.
We've just existed in a very specific period of time, like me and you, where like inflation really hasn't existed at all. Mm-hmm. So that's just something in like our model of how the world works has never been questioned. So like the generation above us weirdly like understands like currency fragility, because they've gone through periods of time like there was 15% inflation or more. Yeah. But I'd kind of push back on that it's going to take long for like generations. It's like, I mean, we grew up through like the internet actually becoming a thing.
That's true.
Which is crazy. It's crazy to think about. Like cell phones as well. Like I remember I remember seeing like my parents' old, like very very young, seeing my parents' old like mobile cell phone, and like not being able to get like not you couldn't account for everybody having a cell phone.
No.
So it's like how like you need to think about that, or like that was like not too long ago. So I think like things have happened so weirdly like that. I think people like in the last 20 years or so, that people are kind of used to changing behavior. And we already deal with like digital cash to begin with, so like even just credit cards being now what mostly everybody like people like cash was so much more heavily used 10 years ago than today, and so like that transition of like I'd only use credit card, and like some stores only accepting credit cards, like that's like a fairly new phenomenon. Like people would have been shocked about that 10 years ago. So like maybe it's like 10 years to do that, but like it's fully possible that happens in 10 years.
Low key, your boy Marty Benz never had a credit card in his life.
Really?
Never. I don't want it. I don't.
Cash? What do you do?
Cash. I can't
really?
I can't be trusted with credit. I can't trust myself. I can't.
Really? Wow, that's shocking.
I can't. I mean, my wife has a credit card. I mean, it's our credit card now. I'd never use it, but
you may be the first person that has ever said that to me.
I am afraid of credit. I don't want to go into debt.
That's a good mentality to have.
To that extent.
Yeah.
Like, and does that make me stupid? Maybe. I just don't want it. I don't want that.
Well, there's like I think people have it. This is not advice to people, but I think people do have like irrational fears of like weird things, of like credit, one of them, and two, like taxes. So like people would be like, taxes is like the weird one where like people would. Like I've talked to a lot of people like over the years. People are like, oh, how is this? Like, how do I pay taxes on this? It's like, you pay taxes on it. Like, what do you mean? It's like anything else. It's like people aren't used to like and like having to actually track their own cost basis for it. It's like a weird like interaction. Like up until now, it's like the infrastructure is getting better, but people are like, I just don't want to deal with the taxes of it, so I'm not going to do this.
Hey, I know somebody that can help us out. Cointaxes.com/crypt.
But there is some irrationality in just how people don't want to interact with like friction of like a system, taxes being one of them, credit as well, and I do like some people have
people think I'm weird because I've never had a credit card.
Some people are like overly hoarding on like savings and don't ever have any plans to do that. Like I'd also say that's irrational as well.
I'm not that irrational.
Yeah, where it's like what are you saving for specific? Like if you're like people like our generation 100% start saving. When you get to like a certain level, it's like you're sitting on just stupid amount of cash. It's like what's the point? Like you're just planning on like dying and then passing that off or what? But so yeah, like people like have money is just a weird thing for most people psychologically.
Yeah, and
it's something that hasn't been questioned. And this is why this is all interesting. It's something that hasn't been questioned at its like fundamental root yet.
Exactly, and that's what I'm trying to get to.
I tend to try and stay away from this conversation because. For like most, if it's an introductory conversation, like
let's dive into it, Tom.
For like if I'm talking to somebody who's interested in investing in the space, it becomes a political conversation very quickly, and like I like to like stay away from that.
Yeah.
And I think there are other better arguments to like to convince people.
Why does it become political? In your view?
Like I think a lot of people get hung up at it's like. The Fed will never allow this, or like you need like a central authority, like this is how it's always worked, right?
It's not how it's always worked though.
In like the last couple 100-ish years.
1913, 105.
Yeah. But people don't like being lectured on like something that they've never questioned on. If they're coming to hear, it's a different story. But like if we're talking about like investment thesis, and I'm like, let's just talk about money. They're like, we know how money works. So,
but they don't. They don't. Most people don't. I like so that is when anybody ever comes up to me, which is happening more often than I'd like now.
Really?
And they're like, not that I like. I love talking about Bitcoin, but it's getting to the point where it's like, damn, I'm that Bitcoin kid, and I got to talk about everybody about this. But people come up to me and be like, why should I buy Bitcoin? Like, what is Bitcoin? Why is it valuable? And the first...
I don't entertain those questions anymore.
Well, I'm still entertaining them. And the way I entertain them is starting out with a question and be like, what is money?
Yeah.
They're like, what? What is money? What are you talking about? Like, U.S. dollar. What does the U.S. dollar represent? I'm like,
have you seen the John Oliver episode?
With explaining blockchain?
Yeah, it was like 3 weeks ago or so.
Yeah.
And he's like, what is money, man? Yeah, that's my fear of sounding like that all the time. But I mean, yeah. Like,
is it like sounding like that, or is it, or you, like, I do sound like
how I explain it on a more macro level is...
But let me get to my point here. So the point is...
Well, I'm really talking to a very specific type of person generally.
Okay.
Like, and like most of my friends know, like, we just don't talk about this.
Oh, yes. My close friends, like, we agree to never bring it up. Like, we'll get too into it, and it's never healthy at the end of the day. But I will entertain when, like, so my wife's like, oh my God, like, Marty's like a big Bitcoin guy. Like,
I heard she's really into Bitcoin Cash.
Her friend, yeah, fuck you, Raquel. But, like, so she'll tell her friends, they'll come out to me and be like, oh, I hear you're into Bitcoin. I'm like, all right, I'll entertain this. And, well, this is this is why it's my favorite first question, because it makes people think right away. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what does your dollar represent? And they're like, well, it's 9 times out of 10. I shit you not. I don't know if this is a commentary on the people I associate myself with, but it's, oh my God, yeah, it's backed by gold. It's like, no, it's not. Like,
yeah, I mean, a crazy amount of people still
believe
yeah,
that.
which is like yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No,
Most people believe that money is backed by gold. That I've encountered.
There was a recent questionnaire that was like above 50% or like some crazy amount.
So
yeah.
Statistically speaking, I'm correct. Most people think that money is backed by gold, and
Yeah.
they don't realize it's not. And
Yeah.
so that's my a priori is like, all right, you don't understand what the money you're using is. Try to figure that out, and then we can like work from there what Bitcoin is. And it is a complete reversion to a sound money, which most people expect that we're on, but don't realize we're not.
Yeah, I mean, it's so like the type of person that like I'll generally talk to, first of all, is generally like at least like knee deep in understanding the space, because it's just too difficult to like, I don't have enough time to start with square one with people, but like the type of person that I'll generally talk about has like a pretty good understanding for like macroeconomics and like understand that.
Lucky.
So like the best way to frame it for that type of person is more of like, no, like the U.S. doesn't really need this at all, like right now.
Mm-mm.
But the rest of the world does, right? And so this is like, Nassim Taleb has like the hedge on tyranny type quote, which I think is a really good way of framing it. That, you know, like you need this type of asset, and like this asset's value will always kind of it will always have inherent value as this hedge of like bad governments can't touch this.
Yeah.
And so that's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways, because like it'll mess up with some good governments, but like in the total global economy, it's a net good thing.
Yeah. It gives the leverage. It gives you some form of leverage in a scenario where a despot government or something like that tries to blow you out of the water or something like that. You have this fallback where, hey, if I have to jump the country, I can put millions of dollars in my brain with a brain wallet and jump the border and start a new life somewhere else if need be.
Yeah, and it's like I try to stay away from like ideological statements, but like something I believe to be true is that like we're probably going to look back like 20 years from now. It's like it was such an archaic system of having like governments having a monopoly over like this kind of like money, right?
I mean, I would argue that people from the past would look to the future and say like, what the fuck's going on here?
For like, I mean, many things. We're living in a weird time on so many different levels, but getting into how I think this like scales, or like this is kind of an unpopular opinion or something that I don't hear anybody talking about. It's like I actually don't think the financial system changes a whole lot in terms of like how it looks. But like you have like clearinghouses, you have like institutional brand name. And like I look to, like, if you look up like bullion banks, this is kind of like what I think is going to evolve with Bitcoin, and like you can get into whether or not this is a good or bad thing, but I think it's kind of inevitable. It's like you're going to have a system, like a closed system where like you have counterparties that you trust. It's like KYC or whatever, and like you kind of have like marked Bitcoins that are like these. I know where this came from, wherever, right? And so like this is like how institutions probably aren't going to get comfortable like really dealing in this until that works. But what's really powerful about Bitcoin versus like having like US dollar or whatever structure is that you at the end of the day like kind of can go rogue and opt out of the system. It's just like you do that knowing that you can't go back into that ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So that's powerful, and that removes like a pretty huge moat in how the financial infrastructure works. And so it's like you're kind of locked in, like hands tied behind your back with like there's just no alternative. Like always having the ability to opt out is what's really powerful.
Yeah, the opportunity, the exit, as Naval would say.
Yeah,
which is interesting, and again, going back to the weird times that we live in, I've harped on this a lot in this podcast on this podcast.
I need to catch up.
Is that one thing I harp on is that we were born at an inflection point, me and you in particular, at our age, that the world is sort of getting like so turned on its head. There's so many paradigm shifts going on at once, where, like, whether you're talking about the freedom of information with the internet, the freedom of money now with Bitcoin, the freedom of flight with modern technology and transportation technology, like we're hitting this inflection point where so many different areas are sort of colliding with each other that it's fucking with the way we perceive the world, number one. Number two, the pace of change is such that, like, at a biological chemistry level, like, we as a species are having a hard time sort of adapting to it. Like, we are the most adaptable species on Earth. There's no doubt about it. But I would argue that the pace of change in recent decades is becoming so that there's so much confusion out there that it's hard for everybody to find their bearings. And that is why I've sort of clung to Bitcoin, is because that is something, like you said earlier, and we were harping on earlier, if it does what it purports to do, is to be a censorship-resistant, peer-to-peer distributed store of value. And that helps us sort of anchor into a stable thing that we can sort of rely on and then make decisions from there, and sort of help figure out the confusion of being born in this inflection point and being caught up in this pace of change.
Yeah, if you want to get heady.
Let's get heady. Let's get heady.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's, I mean, yeah, going to your point of, like, it's all this is so difficult to wrap your head around. Like, I've said a lot of unpopular opinions. I'll go with another one now. Like, a lot of people think this is, like, net great for, like, the lower class, right? It's like this makes everybody wealthy, which it does. I think any efficiency improvement kind of it's a rising tide lifts all ships. But I think what ultimately comes out of this is probably like a massive, even larger wealth gap, right? If you're purely pricing, if this creates a more meritocratic system, like a more fluid economy, like value's gonna flow to what's more meritocratic, and it's like Price's Law. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot. It's like an extreme minority of any system, like, it produces all the value, and it's like it is like an exponential where it's like in 1 in 10 does like 2 in 100, and like it continues. Mm-hmm. So it's like as the system gets larger, the percentage of the system that actually creates the most value is like is smaller. So I think that's an inevitable outcome. And
I won't even say it's inevitable. I would say it's already here. You have things like Instagram. It was 4 people sold for $4 billion or something like that. WhatsApp, same thing. And on the tech side, that's become painfully obvious, especially with software, where to bootstrap a system, you just need to know how to write code. And if you can write the best code that offers the most utility to the most people, you're gonna take a lot of that value immediately.
Yeah, I mean, and like the question of, like, is this good or bad is kind of irrelevant, because it's gonna happen. It's just like what right? is the best for the system. So, like, it's people who make a lot of ideological claims on blockchain, I don't think have thought through most things. Like, in a lot of ways, all this stuff is inevitable, and it's really great. In a lot of ways, there are negative implications of everything. And so, like, what's bad, like, wealth gap is, like, natural, and then it becomes bad for a system at some point.
Yeah.
Because it's like happiness is a very relative framework. And so, like, the least happy places in the world are always the ones that are closest to the wealthy, like, that are relatively poorest to another place that's very close by.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. We'll see how all this shakes out. But it's, like, that's something that's, like, back in my mind. It's, like, that's kind of an inevitable outcome. Like, all these things, like, I wouldn't say what I'm doing. Like, I don't make any decisions on, like, oh, like, this is, like, I think people are, like, I'm doing this to save the world in a lot of ways. Like, personally, like, I think that's a great thing. I do believe, like, all this stuff is fantastic, but I think personally people are more motivated by negative emotions, and I'm just like I feel pain when I'm not just doing this stuff, and it's more of like a masochistic obsession. So like my view is like all this stuff's inevitable and like we're kind of riding the wave.
Yeah.
But like a lot of people make ideological claims I don't think have thought through a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. No, and that's the one thing that I harp on. I've got a couple of Ethereum developer friends, and they're the kumbaya, like we're gonna bring the third world up and save the world. And the one thing I tell them is like, if you realize like if this shit becomes successful, it means something has gone terribly wrong in our traditional world. Like this is a hedge against things going to shit. And if this stuff becomes successful, it's because our traditional world has gone to shit an extent.
So I don't think for Bitcoin to succeed, it needs like the federal bank to collapse, which I think I would say close to even maybe half to maybe more of half of like hardcore Bitcoiners like kind of think that. I
don't think it needs to collapse, but I don't think it needs. I'll put this out there. I'd be somewhat okay if we got our fiat currency system on a somewhat stable ground and just rode that out into perpetuity. But I acknowledge that's probably not going to happen.
I mean, I think there's going to be the same thing with like Ethereum. Like I can say the same thing with Ethereum through a different lens. There's just going to be a transition with the legacy infrastructure into this stuff.
Yeah.
So like I think central banks are going to incorporate like some crypto into whatever they're doing in a way that'll work. And so like I don't like this view of like a total like burn the world down and this will rise. I think is a bad mentality, number one, to have, but I also just don't think it's true and it's going to happen. Like I think it burning down would probably lead to it happening, but I don't think it's the optimal outcome.
I don't either, but
yeah.
I think I don't want to get morbid here, but I think that's the most likely outcome. Things are going like let's look at the world right now. We got Donald Trump as president. Listen, I called Donald Trump being president 2 years out.
We talked about that.
I did.
Yeah, I did as well.
I did not vote for him. I don't vote. I've never voted. I never will vote.
What? Go out and vote.
No. I'll never, like, we've discussed this before. I'm not going to vote. But I called Donald Trump 2 years out. My sister-in-law hated me for it, like thinking I'm a Trump supporter. I'm not a Trump supporter. I just, like, was able to see the writing on the wall. And then you look at, so this is one thing
I thought so I had a similar story with, it was actually the my boss who like helped see the fund. This is like it was widely known that like about a year and a half out that I was like Trump is gonna win, and so he came. He's like, I hear you're like a big Trump supporter. I was like, saying somebody's gonna win and being a supporter are two completely different things.
Right.
I was like, let me explain why he's gonna win. And so he brought it up like a little while ago, but yeah, I thought it's like going back to like, I think if you went through college at a certain time period, you could see. I think colleges and the American universities are a good like
gauge.
Yeah, well, they like lead rest of like. A lot of people have made this claim. This isn't the novel statement that like it leads like rest of society by like 5 years or so, and so we're kind of seeing the same thing that happened, like that I saw happen at Duke, that happened now, and it's like I don't see like it was like an inevitable thing. So it was so obvious like if you were like mapping out, taking like a poker type approach of like. Okay, like these are like or a bracket type approach. Like this is what needs to happen. Like people were just, I don't think people just had this view of like Trump is this crazy character, never gonna win. If you actually looked at okay, these are the scenarios that could play out. It was just so obvious that he was at least being massively underpriced.
Right?
Yeah.
And it surprised a lot of people, but if you look back, like it wasn't surprising. Like, and that goes back to the point I was trying to make originally, which is like the world goes to shit. Bitcoin becoming successful means the world goes to shit. Trump got elected because the world for a lot of people went to shit, and people saw him
equal. Every action has the equal and opposite reaction, and so yeah, that's kind of what, like, the pendulum swings, and it swings more dramatically. The
Well,
Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm like pretty unplugged from politics now, as there's just
I
not enough
do not pay
time in the
attention
day.
anymore.
But yeah, I mean, it's. I don't have an answer for how, like, what's gonna happen.
No, and I'm not saying I have an answer or anything, but I'm saying, like, looking at these trends, and I think you would agree with this.
Yeah.
Like, things are headed a certain way where, like, this week, last week, China now offering China's now offering oil's futures contracts based on yuan. That ruffles feathers. Now we got a trade war that just came out today. I did pay attention to politics on my tweet deck today a little bit because Trump just came out with some tariffs against China. I don't know if it was a reaction to this oil futures contract emergence.
I don't think anybody knows what anything he's saying is about.
What do you mean?
So, do we say he tweeted something out?
He didn't tweet anything. No, he wrote like a piece of legislation that said, "Hey, we're going to start we're going to start putting tariffs on these certain goods coming from China." So it was like I don't know if it was a reaction to the oils contracts or what it was, but regardless, it is a friction between relations between China and the U.S. With that going on top of that, you look at the Middle East, you look at Syria right now, it's still shit. Afghanistan still reeling from the war. Iraq, same situation. Then you have Saudi Arabia and Iran start getting after each other recently. Actually, it might not be those two countries, so I'm not going to speak on that. But things are flaring up, I would say, to an extent. I'm not trying to fearmonger here. I'm not going Alex Jones on all you. I'm trying to be pragmatic, though.
I mean, it's just like this is like, I'm not saying anything new because this is like Ray Dalio's like overall thesis, which I kind of bought into, like, I would say like 2013, 2014, of like it's just debt cycles, and so like it could have popped a lot. Like everybody wants to look at like a micro situation of like this happening because of that. Like it's generally like weird things happen because of broader macro influences, and so like we're kind of hitting this long-term cycle like globally potentially, and like what we haven't seen like globally is like a convergence of like cycles before, like throughout history we've had
I think that's the underlying theme I was trying to get at, is the convergence of these cycles hitting at the same time. Like
anytime there's been it's financial turmoil like in any part of the world, there's been a place that has been able to like grow everybody out of it. Like China was like a big part of that, and so like the financial crisis right now, like emerging markets as a whole, like really where is there an emerging market right now? So like, I mean, like it's like what can change, like because everything is just so tied together and integrated, and like these cycles are like converging like everywhere. So it's I mean, this is kind of part of the reason why I got out of equity, and like I've been bearish for like 3 years in macro, and that hasn't been a great bet to make. So yeah,
last 2 weeks it has, but
yeah,
overall,
I mean you can't. Betting against things is a foolish endeavor.
Yeah, Keynes was right about anything. It was the markets can stay illogical far longer than you can stay solvent. Let's not end this on a depressing note, though. Let's talk about what excites you most in this space. What are you most excited about right now?
What am I most excited about? Oh. I mean, I can go a lot of directions with this. I think what I'm most excited about, like as a whole for crypto, is the amount of talent that's coming in, and not leaving. So it's really captivated a lot of people's imagination and attention, and like we've had this bubble happened, whatever, but a massive inflight of talent has come in, and it's not leaving. So that's like what's going to come out of that. Like I think what an overused buzz word meme has been like bubbles are good and whatever, but it's like what has actually come out of this this latest bubble has been like we have this massive inflow of new talent, and like they're not leaving. Everybody's obsessed about this stuff. Like this is all gonna go, and like it can go in a million different directions.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm a person who loves debate and loves engaging. Like this is kind of what I gave was my perspective of things. Now, is it going to change? Like there's always the percentage chance of things changing in a dramatic way, and so like I'm like both of you and me are like plugged into like the crypto news cycle like obsessively. It's more of like it's a masochistic endeavor.
It really is.
But so yeah, it's like you just can't take your eyes off it because like everything's happening so fast, and it's like so we like really got started like it's been a year, which is crazy. It feels like 45 now.
Right?
Yeah.
Does your fund have 12 months of performance under its belt, right?
We started in September.
Okay.
So yeah. September feels like a very, very long time away. But yeah, it's like you can't take like, I don't have any plans of like taking vacation. Like I haven't, and like, it was like I moved, like when I left, like last time I took vacation, like really like plugged out, was it like in 2015, 16? And so I'm fully energized. Like it's just like there's so many things happening that it's like you can't take your eyes off of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's enthralling, and I think what makes it so enthralling is the possibility that we're changing the world to an extent that will be written about in history. Like, hey, we were born at this inflection point. We were born at the emergence of this technology, and the fact that we're here now and able to contribute. I think that's what draws most people in. Like you were saying, most people are not leaving because it's like, holy shit, if we get this right, we're going to change the world, and we're going to change the way humans think. We're going to change the way humans interact with money. We're going to change the way they interact with each other and how they view trust and how they view money and how it's held, who has custody of it. And these are very fundamental human interactions that are being changed in real time, I would say. And
yeah, I don't, like we were saying, I agree with all of that. I don't have a lot of time to like step away and like appreciate all, but it's all so crazy what's happening. It's like the reason why I don't is like going back to like everything's masochistic is like I know when I'm making the right decisions when I just don't feel like anything about it, and so it's like I'm like jumping back and forth for like this is like the right decision, like I'm like appropriately positioned for this, but like when you do step back, this is all like crazy stuff. This is all like mad scientist stuff.
And we're here for it all, and you freaks are too. And I hope you're enjoying this journey. I don't know if I'm spewing stupid things into your ears or what I'm doing.
I love how it gradually, this is with it's correlated to the wine bottle. It's gradually trended towards just heady stuff.
Heady stuff, yeah. That's what we start out technical, and we get heady as hell, dude. But, like, the world's fucking weird.
What did we talked about Bitcoin versus Bitcoin. What did we talk about, like, head on? Like good.
Head on first. We talked about your journey from discovering Bitcoin to a hedge fund manager. Then we jumped into Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin and the store value versus medium of exchange debate. And then we jumped into...
We talked about like inflation, hyperinflation.
Inflation, hyperinflation. Got a lot of economic lessons on the podcast tonight.
I'd love for more economists to get involved in crypto and to not be creating stable coins.
All right, fuck. We could go down like a 2-hour stablecoin discussion. Stablecoins are stupid. All right, they're susceptible to black swans. They're only stable until they're not.
Well, this is what I'll.
They're only stable until they're not, and that's all you have to say.
The stablecoin as a store of value doesn't make sense. Like there's a total addressable market for stablecoins, and like Tether has kind of proved that. So like, what is that? Is the question.
But Tether is only stable until it's not.
But so like you don't need to be concerned if you're just using a stablecoin for specific purposes. You don't need like you could have confidence for staying stable for so long, right? So it's like I wouldn't recommend using a stablecoin as a store of value because like they're ultimately like what finance has proven time and time again is anything that is a complicated instrument is going to blow up in a completely dramatic way. Yeah. And so like it's not a good store of value, but there is a total addressable market for like that like a open system stablecoin is what we're talking about. Closed system stablecoins make sense almost all the time for specific purposes. We can get into that if we want to, but
next episode.
The stablecoin, like an open system stablecoin, is like its total addressable market is like gambling on crypto. So like going on margin, like you need something stable to peg to kind of, and settle into, and then potentially people who just can't, like right now until Bitcoin becomes stable, like people who just can't get banked. Yeah, like I would say, because I'm not recommending this, but like people who've raised like ICOs, like with Ethereum. Like Ethereum is far too volatile to do any business planning. Like, so we can get into like why somebody has been doing that. But like, if you want clarity into, like, you just raise money with Ethereum, you should, for you projecting out your business, you need a stable capital base. And so if they can't find a bank, which is a whole other problem, then like that could be the best thing that they can do. Like Bitcoin's a little too volatile for that now. Like I think the best way to, Bitcoin is a investment into emerging market real estate. And so it is mostly speculation, but there is the stable value to be had eventually.
Emerging internet market real estate. You're getting heady here as we end this podcast. Freaks, thank you for joining us tonight. Tom did not drink nearly as much wine as I did.
I'm gonna chug right now.
You don't chug. I'm not an advocate of binge drinking, Tom. We do not advocate binge drinking on this podcast.
I'm finishing it before.
I just have a degenerate level of tolerance and maybe a problem. I might have a problem. This podcast might be enabling my problem. This problem's good because it leads us to heady conversations. But Tom, where can we find out more about you?
Don't.
All right. We're not going to find out more about Tom. Thank you guys for joining us this week. Peace and love.
Cheers.
2 hours.
2:15.